So today we're talking about nutrition, and nutrition involves more than the items that just give you calories to grow. Um, it also includes the items that provide the building blocks for growth and repair, and sometimes those are the same things, but also the items that maintain function of tissues. So any chemical element that can be attributed to these functions is part of nutrition. And we usually focus on what gives us energy or what gives us calories because that is our primary nutritional concern. And when we talk about malnutrition, we're talking about a lack of calories or a lack of energy, so starvation, or too much, which is obesity. And both describe malnutrition. So carbohydrates provide readily available energy, but metabolism of lipids gives you more calories. In addition to carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins, we also have vitamins and minerals. And remember, these act as cofactors or coenzymes in all of those chemical reactions. So essential substances, you don't have to memorize all of the essential substances. You do need to know what this means. So how do we assess nutritional status? So there's different ways to assess it, right? And each way has a different sensitivity, which means that you're more likely to be able to pick up a case of malnutrition. The highest sensitivity is just like a decreased nutrient intake, but that really, to be able to identify that and to catch that early, you have to be aware of the dietary history and measures of dietary intake. And that's not what we have. Like that's not the information that we have on a population scale. And so it's not really until you have a growth slowing that you notice, oh, someone isn't growing well or someone's growing too much. But you can see from this chart that like that actually happens kind of later on. And so the measures that we have to assess growth or assess nutritional status aren't actually that sensitive. And next week's module will contain a link to a video that discusses some of the problems with how we measure like BMI. So there have been studies to look at the measurements that we do have in terms of growth, and one is height. Data from the OECD have shown that there's been an increase in stature generally attributed to improvement in net nutrition for most of the 34 member countries, and these are wealthier countries. And of course, we also look at more developing countries. But unfortunately, the United States has not shown the same gains as other countries. And this is not explained by an influx of immigrants of short stature, which people often point to, and that's not a likely source. So the idea that there is a universal potential for growth, regardless of the environmentally sensitive phenotypic expression of that potential, led to a study. So there was a hypothesis that, hey, maybe if we all had the same environmental resources, that we could all grow to a specific height. And so the World Health Organization actually did that study. And remember, height was one of those like highly heritable traits, right? We attributed that to genetics because of those faulty studies, right? So the World Health Organization did a study, and they studied the growth of infants and children from 6 different continents who were healthy at birth and breastfed for at least 6 months. And the result strongly suggested that all human infants, regardless of racial or cultural background, have the genetic potential to achieve similar stature under optimal conditions. Okay, so a little bit more evidence for environment, but remember, it's a complex relationship and you can't divide the two. So let's talk about malnutrition. I won't read all the slides in this presentation. I'll let you go back and read them. But remember, malnutrition, you could have a deficiency or you could have an excess. And it could be any of those components that we talked about in the beginning. You could have a deficiency or excess of vitamins, of minerals, of calories, of proteins, lipids. So primary undernutrition or starvation is the thing that usually people think about when they think about malnutrition, right? And there is a difference. I want you to know the difference between marasmus and kwashiorkor. So marasmus is total caloric undernutrition. Kwashiorkor is caused by a severe protein deficiency. And if you remember in the cardiovascular disease lecture, protein was one of those things that held the fluid in the blood vessels, right? So it made that osmotic pressure or oncotic pressure to pull water back into the venous system. And so if you don't have enough protein in your diet, even though you might have enough calories to keep you functioning, then you're going to have all of this edema. You're going to have fluid leakage that isn't able to get pulled back into the vasculature. And so this is where you see the babies with the big, big bellies, because this is fluid in their belly. And regardless of the type of undernutrition or starvation, malnutrition in childhood has lifelong effects. So it does matter how old you are and where you are in your development in terms of how significant the starvation is going to be. Of course, starvation is horrible no matter how old you are, but it's particularly horrible when you're a fetus or when you are young in childhood. And the effects can be long lasting. So there's also secondary undernutrition or cachexia. This is not because you're not eating enough or you're not taking in enough of whatever nutrient. It's because you have another process in your body that is stealing all of your nutrition. So something like a cancer that requires a lot of nutrition and a lot of calories to continue to grow and to continue to divide and continue to make your blood get shunted to that tumor to feed it. So it's stealing all of your nutrition. Then you can have this cachexia and you're eating plenty, but you're still losing weight. That's a really worrisome sign. And the pathophysiology involves some of those cytokines. And you maybe remember from one of the first lectures, this is part of the inflammation cycle or inflammatory cycle, and your body releases all these cytokines or chemicals that cause you to have a fever and cause you to not be so hungry. And so there is some relationship maybe with some of the just not feeling as hungry and maybe not eating as much, but this is really apparent in terms of like that doesn't even explain it. And so you get this wasting of your muscles and this really, really thin body habitus. And this is regardless of the inciting factor, whether it's a tumor, whether it's AIDS, whether it's some other process that's causing this, the root cause is this stress cycle, this fight or flight, right? And then you have ultimately the release of cortisol, and that will start breaking down your muscle. That will start mobilizing your energy stores, but you're not like running it off. You're not exercising it off. It's just that you're mobilizing these energy stores to feed this pathologic process. You also get, effects on other parts of your body that are also related to your metabolism. But if you go back in the book and you look at the HPA cycle and cortisol and the effects of that, this picture should make sense. So the flip side of malnutrition is having too many calories, having too much energy, and that's obesity. And we'll talk about this more next week. But there are a lot of health effects of obesity, or a lot of correlated effects, not necessarily causation. And I will see you in a few minutes.